Well, welcome, Srikant, and
Thank you very
welcome
much.
everyone. Yeah, it's so good to see you again. It's been a long time, and I really appreciate you doing this. And for the benefit of everyone joining us now, we especially appreciate that this was originally intended for a one-on-one catch-up, you and me, and
Yes.
to explore the work that you've been doing recently, especially with the MBA. But you were kind enough to agree that we would do this live and have a conversation. So thank you for that.
It's an absolute pleasure, Dan, and it's so good to see you again.
Yeah. Well, if we do this quickly enough between the two of us, we'll leave some time for questions. I understand that you may have a little bit of flexibility beyond 12:30. And,
yes, I do.
So I'm sure there'll be many questions as we go, and hopefully we'll have some time to address them. So let's just start off, Srikant, with really just a quick snapshot of the MBA at Harvard. Tell us what it is. How many students, how many faculty are typically engaged?
All right. So the HBS MBA class is a very big class. Each entering class is about a 900 plus, so 930. So in the 2 years of the program, we have about 1,850, 1,900 students. So a very large program, 250 faculty. And as you know, Dan, we are very much known for teaching by the case method. So that's what we use.
Well, things must have been pretty normal late January and into February on the campus at HBS. Snow on the ground, people everywhere. But then, as things began to progress with this virus, I'm sure nervousness began to emerge. And then at some point, you got the call, right? The call for moving this MBA program and all of its pieces online. Tell us about that charge and how you felt at the time.
Well, so absolutely correct, Dan. We knew there were things going on, I would say, through the month of February, as things were looking like this might be a much more serious event. But we should be, I think, to put it in context, the last time the university took an action like this was around 1940 during the Second World War. So it's been 80 years since we said we would take any kind of action of the type we were contemplating, which is moving everything online or not having students physically be on campus. So the intensive work on this started on, I remember it very vividly, March 7th or 8th is when we first debated that weekend about what we would do. And March 9th, I remember very vividly, is a Monday. March 23rd is what we called V-Day, virtual day. That's when everything was going to go online. So we had 2 weeks to do it. And let me just tell you just a set of steps that we had to take. So in 2 weeks, we were clear that we still wanted to deliver a transformational learning experience online. We had to set up and deliver a technology infrastructure. So that meant Zoom, hardware, connectivity, hotspots, all the technological issues that we would have to deal with, taking that large a class online. We had to train 125 faculty, because remember, it is only at the end of the second semester that this is happening, Dan. So half the faculty we are about 275 faculty, but 125 were actually engaged in teaching in that spring semester that had to be moved online. So move 125 faculty, most of whom had not taught online using the case method. Many had not taught online at all, but certainly very few had taught online using the case method. Luckily for us, there were a group of faculty members, and I happen to be in that group, who have taught online something called the Harvard Business Analytics Program, which is a joint program between the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, the Statistics Department, and the Business School on machine learning and artificial intelligence. And so we were the trainers, if you will. The 10 of us who taught that were the trainers teaching the 125. So roughly we had, each of us had about, 12 to 15 faculty that we were training. We also very quickly realized that teaching online means it's not a faculty going into a classroom, but trying to figure out what the support staff would be. So we had 125 staff members who volunteered to be what we named online learning facilitators, OLFs, as I might for short use through the rest of this discussion. These folks were faculty support specialists who work with the faculty, research associates, staff members from the MBA program, exec ed, IT, the Division of Research, Human Resources, Finance, none of whom had done this activity before. So they needed to be trained in this 2-week period. We wanted to make sure that we prepared videos and documentation resources for teaching online with 2 purposes in mind, not only for training our own folks, but all of this material has been put online. If you go to virtual teaching online at Harvard Business Publishing, all of this material has been made available for free to anyone who wants to benefit from it. I hope it's of some value to others. So then we created a practice classroom with 2,000 of our online students, joining, so that faculty could practice delivering what it means to do an online case method teaching beyond, before they actually went into the classroom for the first time. Of course, in the meantime, we were getting the 1900 MBA and doctoral students online and developing norms and connectivity. And Dan, what has been amazing is the backup plans that you've got to develop for the technology problems that you might face. Faculty, if they unfortunately become sick or are unwell, OLFs if they are not there. And of course, the fun part of doing this whole work was to do it in this short period of time, Dan, where most people on the task force barely knew each other. We were 35 on the task force, but as you add up all these other groups that we were engaging with, 300 and odd people all together in it. So it was amazing work, great fun, and really we had a lot of fun. We had a lot of learning and a lot of fun doing it.
Well, I recall your message to me on a different topic, and you describing this as the most memorable 2 weeks of your academic career. So I knew I had to learn more about this and share this with others. So thank you for that, Srikant. But let's get right to what you learned. Let's get right first to what you decided. I know that you decided to use the Zoom platform, and for what reasons did you make those choices, the choices that?
A very good question again, and I think it'll be helpful for me to again, for people trying to do this, helpful for me to lay out some of the principles that we used in the Zoom was clearly one of them, Dan, if it'll be helpful. So
Sure. Yeah.
We coined a term in the task force that we called minimum viable classroom. So we said, if you're going to move this fast, to do it this quickly, we have to make sure that faculty will have a good experience, but let's not look at what the gold standard might be. And I'll come to this in a minute. So my interests in design thinking, and it was very much what led to the way in which we went about this whole task. We said that faculty will continue to innovate. So we created a Slack channel. Slack is a channel that you can use where instead of sending emails to individuals, this gets into a public channel. So you're sort of writing emails to everybody and everybody can contribute, and there can be different threads of conversations that go on. And then we would curate best practices and keep improving. So the idea was do something that works well, learn, improve it, learn, improve it, learn, improve it. So that's the model we've actually followed over these last 4 weeks that we've been in the program. This is the getting into the 4-week time period here. We also made a decision that if we were comfortable at an 80% level, let's go. Let's not the best be the enemy of the good. If we were 80% good, we were going. We were not trying, because we had 2 weeks to do this whole task, and you had to have some principles that were going to guide us. Otherwise, we were going to get caught up in all sorts of debates that wouldn't allow us to move forward. Of course, the focus initially was standing up the infrastructure, but we were very clear early on that we also had to have operational excellence. There's only so much that your infrastructure is going to be able to do. By the time the work actually starts, there'll be a problem that comes up. And are we prepared to very quickly respond to those problems? So at the time we were setting up the infrastructure, we were also trying to work towards this idea of operational excellence. How might we respond quickly to problems? Or clearly, the way you kind of get all these multiple things happening is have different work streams, all of them biased towards decisions over analysis, and tremendous amount of learning from each other and collaborating intensively. So Zoom came out of some of those principles. We said, okay, yeah, there were 2 or 3 platforms that we could evaluate. Our IT leaders who were involved in the work stream that was focused on technology had an opportunity to talk to people at Zoom. So we actually had that set up. But of course, you know, whether you're thinking Microsoft Teams or Blue Jeans, there were other options that were there in case we needed it. You know, how do we pivot in case we had to? But, you know, our overall experience so far with Zoom has been very good.
I'm sorry about that. Tell us a little bit about the case method in particular. You know, I know that this is a special thing for Harvard Business School. Nearly 100 years, I understand, since you started using the case method. So this is something that you're grown accustomed to doing in the classroom.
Very much so, and there is an important way in which, as you think about the case method online, is different, and but the case method itself, Dan, to respond to your question, is of course participant-centered learning. So we have a case with typically a decision problem and a protagonist who is grappling with that decision problem. It might have many decision problems, and so many pastures that we might want to go through in the course of a single case discussion in class. And students come, read the case ahead of time, come to class prepared, and the role of the faculty is to engage in a vigorous discussion where students are put in the position of the decision maker in order to make a decision. And as they're doing that, they're of course drawing on a lot of knowledge and content that they would want to use in order to make a decision. Let's say to invest in a particular plant. Okay, if you need to think about financials, do you need to think about technology? And depending on the purpose of a class, the case would be slanted in order to drive that learning. But it is learning that comes from thinking about a decision problem rather than learning that just comes from, you know, a textbook or a lecture.
Well, I've been in one of those case learning classrooms in the past with Robert Kaplan. He's a master just as you are, and David, of course, our friend David Garvin was a master at the case method. And I know this requires a lot of engagement on the part of the students. And I do understand that class participation is critical. How did you motivate students to participate in this in the online environment?
So it's you know, so I actually think that the case method in the online environment has a number of advantages, Dan. It's obviously more challenging because you're trying to engage in a discussion with you know, people who are showing up on the Zoom platform in their you know, in just like we are here in our you know, little boxes, but you know, the challenge in online learning is always about how do you retain engagement of the audience, because they are, you know, there's if you're just giving a lecture, at what point do they tire of, we know even on ordinarily when they're physically present, people tire of just listening to someone. And so, you know, the case method is in that sense helpful online because it is more engaging. Now, what you have to do, and our faculty are doing this as we speak, is always when you're teaching, and you have to do this when you're teaching online in any case. So, you know, one makes this distinction between remote teaching and online learning. And by that, I mean, in online learning, you are trying to think about the medium and try to think about what should you do to keep the audience much more engaged. So you don't just take what you're doing in the physical classroom and just take it online. And that part, a lot of our training was what should you do differently. I'll give you 3 or 4 examples, and the audience may have other questions that I'm very happy to get into. But one is around taking polls. So you can take polls very easily. What should someone do? I can very quickly take a poll on Zoom. So it's a yes, no, there can be different things. I can set up polls. I immediately know that Dan thinks that they should make the investment, but Nicole thinks that they should not make the investment. Now I can call on Dan and say, Dan, tell me, why did you think that the investment would make? Nicole, why did you think? So constantly engaging the audience, because I know everyone who has voted one way, who has voted the other way. I already know what they're thinking. The second feature that, as you get more comfortable with it, and I can actually see it happening on our screen here, is the chat function, where you can see a lot of the participants are already talking about the chat. Chat is like giving me the thought bubbles in people's minds, which I don't get when one participant is speaking in class. I don't know what another one is thinking. While one is speaking, if the other one has a very different view, they're chatting me. They're telling me, Srikant, I don't quite agree with what Dan just said. I have a totally different view. So now I have more data to play with. So I use the chat function to inject even more energy into the class. You want to sort of think about your online teaching in pastures of about 10 to 15 minutes. You don't go too much longer without injecting some kind of a punctuation or an attempt to do it. So for instance, yet another functionality in Zoom that we trained our faculty on is how to use breakout rooms. So, okay, we have this debate. Now we have this difficult question about what kind of performance evaluation system you want. Let's say it's a case on performance evaluation. I can randomly create quick breakout rooms, and people can go into the breakout rooms and now discuss what it is and then bring them back in again. So it's this attempt of trying to design your class to find ways to constantly engage and inject energy. Case method automatically has that when you're live, because you can walk up to someone and you can engage them in a debate, but you can't do that here. So how do you do it in a different way, using things like polls and chat and breakout rooms to constantly induce energy in the class? But that for me is a very important part of online learning, is how do you keep take the user perspective, take the student perspective. They're seeing the screen. How do you keep them engaged?
Well, I like that. For grading purposes, it seems like it's very helpful too. I never thought about that, what they submit in advance, their participation in polls, the chat, all of this becomes data, hard data that can be used for understanding the individual's participation. Yeah,
and let me tell you a very innovative way that one of our faculty colleagues started using chat. At the end of the class, after the class is over, he said, send me in a short 3 or 4 sentences your conclusions from the case and your arguments about what it is. So people who had not participated, they can give in their contributions. I can now get so much more data, and again, you can take this and put it into various formats and review it. So you can get a lot of between the polls and the chat and the actual participation, you can get a lot more value from the online environment, precisely because it allows simultaneous input of energy into the class.
Did you find that the shy students were more participatory online?
It's a very good question. I actually, talking to some faculty members about this, they mentioned these 2 or 3 advantages, and one that seems to come up quite regularly is the shyer students, the more introverted students somehow feel in this medium, because of the tools that you use, they're more willing to participate. They're kind of forced to participate, and that's all that was holding them back, which you can't do simultaneously in the physical classroom. Allows you to do that in the virtual classroom. Definitely has the effect that you're thinking about that.
Great. I'm going to open things up for questions in a few minutes, but I wanted to ask you about one thing in particular. Last time I saw you, you and David was in the innovation lab that you helped create on the Harvard campus. And
yeah.
I know we didn't talk specifically about this, but often people think necessity is the mother of invention or innovation. What, besides what you've already mentioned, were there other interesting or innovative things that have come out of this experience so far?
No, I mean, I think many of the ones that I mentioned, we have mentioned that are the ones I think that are the prominent ones, Dan. I think the way to think about this and the way I would say we should frame it going forward is, of course, this was came out of necessity, but how do we think about the classroom of the future, and how do we think about learning when it is truly blended by trying to take advantages of both mediums? So how do we, and I think that's where a lot more of the innovation is going to go. At the moment, I think the innovation has largely been around when you go online, how should you innovate, and what should you do? But I think where it will go to whenever we get back to whatever the new normal is how do we now take full advantage? They were sort of at some level either ors, that used to happen. And that's initially the right way in which the innovation should work. You're either going to be online or you're going to be in the classroom. But are there, and I don't know the answer to this question. I think it's an open question. Maybe, over a period of time, we'll figure this out. Is how do we take advantage of both? I think the other learning that I would tell you we had is, again, as many of our colleagues here are trying to do this, when I made my presentation to the faculty, I said, I listed all the heroes, of course, of this work. And as in everything else, Dan, it always comes down to the people, people who believed in the mission of the school, the vast number of faculty and OLFs and the team, people who are sort of willing to run toward the fire. They were wanting to do that. I think the distributed leadership model that we have, again, different schools probably have very similar things. We took full advantage of that. That is really what inspired and motivated teams to work, everyone wanting to contribute, and this idea that we were all going to fail or succeed together. It wasn't going to be an IT problem that caused the problem. It wasn't a faculty problem that if it didn't work, either it was going to work for everyone or it was not going to work for it. There was going to be no one particular to pick out for. That's the fault of the task force, and really my fault if it didn't, because at the end, I didn't make very good choices to make it all work. And I think what my dean, Nitin Noria, sent us an email right before we started and online on the 23rd of March. And, came out of a lot of discussions he had with a number of our faculty colleagues, is, we're going to make mistakes, but we're going to correct it. We are not going to be perfect, but we're going to keep improving. So we need from everyone, a few things. One is be patient. Don't make have some forbearance towards what's going on. Be forgiving. If we make a mistake, it's not, we tried our best, but we still made a mistake. So please forgive us for it. Be resourceful, to your point about innovative, continue to come up. And there have been some very interesting innovations that faculty have done. Some people writing on their boards and taking a picture of it and using that as a thing, the way in which screens were shared. Another innovation that someone did was have their, if you're doing a finance case or a technical case, you can give control to a student and ask them to share their work, on screen. So be resourceful and be adaptive, constantly think about what you might have to do differently. So I think a large number of the innovations came from those kinds of norms, I think, that we established. And I would encourage almost all our audience to think about those norms of, being patient, forgiving, resourceful, and adaptive. I think those were beautiful ways in which we could think about the challenges that we had.
That's great, Srikant. We'll get to the questions in just a second. wanted to let you know that's where I was going with that innovation question, to look ahead and say, you know, what do you think will come out of this? And it sounds like you see perhaps a little more blended learning coming out of all of this experience. You want to confirm?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it will be there, and I think you know, we'll be more imaginative in thinking about, again, and I would always take a design thinking perspective here, Dan, which is try to think about that you're trying to help. You know, we are a very fantastic profession because, you know, we do one thing: we have knowledge that we try to give to others, and we try to make them, you know, the best they could be. But different people might have different ways of doing it. By the way, I think there might be a role for asynchronous learning here. Everything we did here was synchronous. That is, the class was actually happening as we were teaching, but there can be asynchronous learning. There can be, you know, physical learning. There can be, and it doesn't have to be blended all happening at the same time. The question is, might I design a class where you actually do some asynchronous learning first? Might you do some online thing? Might you then come into the physical classroom? I mean, all these models will now open up, I think, for us. So when I say blended, it's really blended across all manner of opportunities, always focused on what's best for the learner.
Great. Thank you, Srikant. And thanks everyone for being patient with the questions. They've piled up. Just a few quick ones and then some more challenging ones, I think.
Sure.
Srikant, there's a question about the OLFs and the ratio. When we think about this program, the ratio between the faculty, the students, and the OLFs.
So we ended up picking a ratio of 1:1, Dan, as I said. And by the way, this had a dramatic effect on the culture that you create of, these were staff members, but they became an integral part of the teaching and learning that was happening in the classroom. They became a partner of the faculty in delivering that learning in the classroom. Whereas usually I would go into the class on my own, alone, you know, that's what faculty do, you and the students, and that's it. Here we were, you know, with the OLFs being there. So we ended up with a 1:1 ratio. We did not, you can do it probably with, you know, 1 OLF for 2 faculty, depending on what needs are. But these were people who were, you know, more sophisticated in IT based on work that they had done. Of course, they went through a lot of training, but they became partners of the faculty, and therefore we stayed with a 1:1 ratio. 125 faculty, 125 OLFs.
Did you shrink the classroom? It's about 90 students typically? Or?
No, each class is still 90. We did not shrink it. It's something that we will think about going forward, but we did not shrink the classroom. There was no opportunity to do it because, as you know, we believe in the section dynamics, and the sections are important. And when you're doing, particularly we were teaching very important material like leadership and corporate accountability and ethics and moral values and, you know, legal and the responsibility to society course is happening right now. And the more you're comfortable with people, you know, the more you're willing to, you know, share important ideas. So we stayed with the class section.
Now we have a question. Obviously, this is already after the second semester started. We have a question about what if this were at the beginning of the first year, where we have the cohort coming in and they don't already have the benefit of experiencing each other in the classroom face to face. Do you think this would be any different or harder?
I definitely think it's a very perceptive, important, thoughtful question, Dan. My view is it would be different. We now, you know, there may be the case that as different countries and different programs are starting earlier, we still have a little ways to go before the fall semester starts. Hopefully we're in a better place at that time. But people who are trying to start this in the very short term, definitely I think it's going to be a more challenging situation if they haven't met ahead of time before they actually you know, haven't known each other before they meet online. What I would recommend in that case, Dan, and we are thinking about it too, even for the participants who are there, is how do you think about 2 things from a student perspective? One, engagement, so that they are feeling engaged, and I talked about several tools and techniques we can use in the learning side to do it. But the second is, how do you think about extracurricular and co-curricular activities that really makes it such a powerful experience in the MBA program? There's the academic component, and then there is the extracurricular, co-curricular component. And what might be ways in which you might be able to do that? I'll give you one very interesting thing that happened in our environment. We have something called the HBS show that happens at the right as students graduate. You know, this is the there's singing, and there's drama, and there's skits, and all the things that they do. We actually did it online in Zoom. They did an incredible job doing that. But pay attention to this co-curricular and extracurricular activities even more if you happen to be starting online. I wouldn't advise it. I would tell you my initial feeling right now, and just my opinion. I wouldn't advise it if you can help it, but we're not in a world where we have the choice. And if you don't have the choice, you might be forced to do it. But if you're doing it, pay attention to that. What can you do to connect? How can you have office hours with the faculty quickly? How can you get them to meet in small rooms earlier? How do you get them to bond? Pay attention to that rather than just bring them into the class.
Thank you, Srikant. We have a tougher question.
Sure.
About the price value ratio. Obviously we're in a very challenging situation right now. People are being patient. People are understanding what's happening out there. There's some disagreement, as you know.
Yeah.
But looking ahead, beyond this immediate crisis, how do you see this price value ratio changing, if at all?
It's a very good question, and I have to say that it's as you know, we among many others made the decision that we were not going to do that, and we have stayed with that. We have stayed with that decision. I think two things I would say. One is this kind of decision will be made at the level of the university. It's not possible for individual schools in our context to make it. So it's a kind of question that's outside our purview at some level. Harvard University as a whole will make this call, and we all believe that's the right way to go. Should you be thinking about different choices there? As I said, I'll give you one example where I'll argue against it, and then I'll give you an example where I can argue for it. So I really want to present to the audience both sides of it. So I teach a course on machine learning and artificial intelligence. So that's a course that I've taught now for 4 or 5 years. I have taught that course in the physical classroom and just using our standard method. So you give them some reading, they come there, there's a case, they come in and they discuss it, and we go through that discussion. And I have used it in an online classroom where there's asynchronous material that they read, they prepare. It might surprise our audience a little bit that my experience is that the online experience worked just as well as the physical experience for my particular course. So I'm just giving my personal experience. And the reason it worked well was that when you are online, and I have some asynchronous material, and if you design it properly in these small chunks where person can't proceed until they have understood a material that has gone on, you're able to make sure that the deeper learning that you want to have happen before they come to class actually happens, right? It's completely online. And they did in the asynchronous material. So when I came to class, some of the questions that I would get in the other class, in the physical class, never came up in the online class because the material was designed in a way to do it. So you can have, my point is they're different, but you can have very good educational experiences in the real world. I think our challenge is how quickly can you get there? And so the issue is going to be on this question about what the value question that you're asking is, how quickly can you get there? Because if I've been only practiced in doing it one way and now I have to do it another, will I be able to do it well? But if done well, I think there are plenty of very good opportunities for us to use those differences, as I said, to our advantage along the examples I was giving. So I can see that there'll be an issue, and then I can see on the other side as we get better that there are some significant advantages. Now, how all that trades off and balances off in the long run, I actually think it won't be that big a bigger deal. And I can tell you that for the exec ed program that we do online, there is no difference between tuition online and the tuition in the classroom. None. We use exactly the same thing for the two programs. But as in the short run, as we are trying to get better at it and do well at it and not take advantage of the differences, perhaps this question will be more germane. But I'm not completely convinced that in the long run, one is going to be inferior. And that's what I mean is, how do you think about the blendedness and how do you think about the differences and advantages of each forum? But in the short run, I can see it might be an issue precisely because we haven't gotten as good at it as students would like. But it's a difficult question, but I did want to say that there are clearly two sides to that argument.
Srikant, I want to do a time check. You were originally scheduled to stay with us for 30 minutes. We're about 10 minutes over. Do you have time for one or two more questions?
I can go on. I can go, no problem.
Great, thanks so much. Thanks so much. This one I think is interesting. I'd really be curious about your take on it, especially since, as I mentioned, I saw you last in the Innovation Lab. There's a question about, in business, we don't always need laboratory environments to do our teaching, but in many cases, like medical schools and in other kinds of areas, they do need labs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you learned anything as part of this process that gives you some insights that might be helpful to those kinds of programs, those kinds of courses.
And the courses you're talking about are like at the medical school kind of things where they actually need laboratories to do it. No. So I think that's another very good question. And I think there will be some more limits than to those questions. As you know, I'm closely associated on the boards of some large companies in the pharmaceutical industry, for instance, where obviously some of our research, by the way, a lot of our research is done using computer modeling now, as many people who are familiar with the way in which modern medicines are developed know. But there is no question that at the end of the day, it is something that's going to be, has to have a human component because eventually it's going to be, tested and tried on humans. And so I think in the labs, there is going to be that challenge, and we'll have to figure out ways in which, as we are delivering some content online, it's a perfect example where I think the blendedness will have to be even more tilted towards getting some of the lab work done in the lab, because there's no substitute today for that actual work that needs to be done. How it should be done, I think we have a little bit of a playbook to go by, Dan. So assuming that we have to maintain, I'm talking now about the very current crisis, assuming you have to maintain social distancing, so you'll have to be sure that the lab work is done in a way by which that is maintained. Students who, I think that the challenging part there will be that students who can't actually travel, and how do you then create lab facilities for them in wherever they are located? That will be a bigger problem. Can they go to certain hubs where you might create them, where you would do it? No question in my mind, Dan, both points that you made are very valid. Number one, you're going to need them, and it's not going to be easy to imagine how you would be able to deliver a very good educational experience without any kind of labs. And second, that it'll be much more challenging, therefore, to do. But the ideas I think that people could potentially work on are there hubs where people can go to, because you can't have everybody travel. The travel is going to be where the problems are. That if those restrictions become a little bit less, then I could imagine campuses starting, you're still maintaining the social distancing, still managing how you work with the labs. And those particular areas might be ones that we might have to open earlier, just because they will be more disadvantaged if in fact the lab work can't be done.
Interesting. I always feel like sometimes the most creative moments come by accident, as a spark of creative insight. And
It's true.
I worry sometimes that online everything tends to be planned a little bit more. Last question, Srikant. There's something dear to my heart, as you know, and something we had intended to talk about one-on-one, is this work that we do, and that's in developing countries and parts of the world, in many parts of the world where the outbreak is really starting to be felt, places that may be more vulnerable. And I'm wondering if anything that you've learned might help schools, our schools, in these parts of the world to address this problem, perhaps creatively, or even just a motivational talk from you would be very helpful.
No, I think it's a very another very important question. I think Dan, as you know, one of the big issues there would be anything you're doing online necessarily assumes two things. Number one, is the connectivity there? So can people actually connect to the class and to the instructor and to the faculty member? And secondly, do they have the not just the connectivity there, but do you have an iPad? Do you have the tools by which you would actually be able to do it? And those, I think, become very important questions. I think to the extent that either collectively we can come up with ways, and you and your role, Dan, think about ways in which you might be, because unless you address those two problems, then anything online becomes moot, because if you can't connect, you can't connect, and depending on where people are, that's a different challenge. But I think thinking creatively about that might go back to what we were talking about earlier, Dan. Are there hubs that we might create? So you think about the person delivering, but then there's even while maintaining social distancing and so on, are there locations? Might we use examples like we do in our world, like task unification? Are there businesses or areas where students could potentially go to in order to connect? Might you think about more asynchronous learning, so that faculty would, particularly if they're following lectures, put up videos and they're available at any time, and someone can go at a later point in time and do it. So I think that to your point, more innovation and creativity will come out. And what I would encourage very much, Dan, is if you already have some kind of a Slack channel, created within the network, so that people coming up with these ideas, because there are going to be tons of ideas coming up in different ways in which people will respond, which is what we're doing, or even in the environment we're faced with, so that those ideas get aggregated and collected, and that others can use it, question each other. You use the whole point of the network is, how do I take advantage of learning that might happen in one corner that might never be seen by another corner, and actually connect it because of the online environment that we can operate. So how do you create that? So the local conditions will drive, I think, a lot of the innovation. I've talked about some of the ideas, but for me, the more important would be, how does the network play a role? How does the GBN network play a role to actually connect all these innovations, and then have someone try to think about ways of curating it, which is what we are also trying to do now for our environment, to try and capture best practices and see how they might be spread. So I'm hopeful. I think that there will be some challenges of the type you mentioned, but some, as they say, never waste a good crisis. And I know, knowing you as an individual and person, I know you will not, and that you will take a full advantage of some of these opportunities that will come from innovations, that each one will try. And they might be small ones. It might look to us to be a small one, but when you start putting it together, as we know in many other innovations, becomes a big deal. So I'm actually very hopeful that some of the most interesting things will come out of the network that you're operating there.
Thank you for that, Srikant. Thanks for the extra time. We really appreciate it. I apologize to anyone who had a question we didn't get to, but this has been great, Srikant. You know, the continuity of learning is especially important today. You know, to me, one of the things that stands out is that everyone that I've talked to, people like you, we're learning every day. We're innovating, and this is really important for the world. You know, we don't want to look back on this crisis and feel like we had a gap of 1 month, 2 months, a year in this learning. So thanks so much, Srikant, for sharing.
Yeah, so let me just, there's some fantastic chat questions and comments here, Dan, that you might want, just make sure that when you, you know, when you get the thing that you don't lose some of those. But let me respond to a couple of them. You know, there's the beauty about Thought Box.
You can stay with us, great.
Look at those and see it. I just wanted to make sure that for people who want to know what our learning experiences were, Harvard Business Publishing. So they've got to go to the HPP, the Harvard Business Publishing website, and simply go to online teaching or there, and they'll immediately be directed. It's actually quite prominent already on the website, but if you need to, it'll be immediately directed to where that is. And I could also send you a link, Dan, to it if you wanted to share it with the audience. So I know there are several questions around, you know, what people are saying here. And I think that the other question that comes up is around the co-curricular, extracurricular. And I think there, just make sure that students feel connected to the faculty and each other. That's my basic advice. So, you know, how do you create environments where faculty are willing to do office hours with a group of students? You know, we may not do that automatically normally, but many of my colleagues are just doing that. They're inviting 3 or 4 students and them, you know, just that connection, the concern, the ability to connect when you're distancing otherwise, get students to talk amongst themselves. We actually threw at the end of our event, Dan, an online party. So for my virtual task force, I couldn't get them all together, but I wanted to celebrate what they had done. So online party. So what did we do? Well, we had a small group of us. It was a surprise party. We collected a little bit of we did a poll, you know, asked very funny questions on the poll. So, you know, I used to have my meetings at 7 a.m. in the morning. So how many of you actually came to the meeting in pajamas rather than being, you know, dressed for a regular meet? Just fun, you know, fun things. We took videos and pictures, and someone did a brilliant rendition of jokes around that. We then went into breakout rooms and said, if we had to design a t-shirt, which we are doing for the task force, what would you put on that design? And it was hilarious. I haven't laughed as much as I have in that 1 hour party that we had online. No less than what I would have laughed if I was sitting in my office, you know, sitting in a room with all these colleagues. Of course, I missed meeting them, hugging them, you know, just loving the human interaction. We lost that, but one can still be. So be very creative about the co-curricular, extracurricular. I'll probably have more. I'm working on that just now, probably have more on that, hopefully a month or 2 months from now as we begin to explore different things. And then another question around, should you do async, sync, and in class? I think all those 3 work very well together as we described. And I think this idea that how do you keep students engaged and be healthy. There's a question around grading and exams. We have always gone to we had always gone to online exams anyway, even while we were here. So a student could always download an exam. We we time-stamped how much time they had to do it. So all my exams that I was doing at HBS. So exams turned out to be not a big problem. And grading, as I said, with chats and all that, Dan, turned out to be, you know, very, very helpful as well. So I think those were some of the questions that I saw on the chat, and that's the advantage. You know, you had some questions, but I saw more here, and so I could go after some of those as well. I see some other Q&A as well, but it's great.
Thank you for digging in. And I again, can't thank you enough, Srikant. I've said this probably every time you and I get together. You could be anywhere in the world doing anything at the moment, and you chose to spend it with us. We appreciate it so much.
Not at all, Dan. Always a pleasure to see you. And I'm, I always say that I've been very lucky in my life. And so anything I can do to be helpful, as in this particular case, is just a privilege and a joy. And particularly to spend time with you, Dan, as you know, our long relationship and the phenomenal individual that you are. I always love doing it. So no worries. I do miss David Garvin. Of course, I wish he were here. It would have been so much fun to have the three of us have this conversation. He left us too early, and the world is much poorer because of it.
Well, he'd be very proud of you, Srikant, for the work that you've done. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.